The man's face was covered in sand, but he didn't dare wipe it away. If he let go, he'd fall into a 100-meter cliff. Aware of his predicament, his body trembled uncontrollably. He dug his fingers into the ground, but the sand was too loose. His entire body began sliding toward the cliff edge. His hands weren't effective, so he pressed his face against the ground as a brake, barely managing to stop. Just then, his phone rang in his backpack. Thinking this might be his only chance for survival, he adjusted his position, keeping his face firmly against the ground while reaching for the phone. But just as he was about to grab it, his body suddenly slid rapidly forward. Fortunately, his quick reflexes allowed him to stop at the cliff's edge. Looking at the rocks below, a plan formed in his mind. If he could use the seawater as a buffer, he might survive. With a powerful leap, he successfully plunged into the sea, but the water was too shallow, and his hip struck a rock. The massive impact knocked him unconscious. Luckily, he regained consciousness in time and used his last bit of strength to surface. However, the real test was just beginning. After reaching shore, he carefully examined his body. Apart from a cut on his hand, everything seemed fine until he tried to stand up and immediately collapsed. Only then did he realize he had no feeling in his lower body. He thought about his phone, but it was no longer working. The man desperately shouted for help, but only the sound of waves answered him. With no choice, he treated his wound and lay on the rocks to conserve energy. When he opened his eyes again and still felt nothing in his lower body, he knew he needed to find a solution quickly. He assessed his situation. Climbing back up the cliff was impossible. Fortunately, he spotted a small island in the distance, his only hope for survival. Gathering all his strength, he rolled into the sea with a splash. Things weren't as simple as he'd hoped. With his legs paralyzed and one hand severely injured, he could only slowly move forward using his remaining good hand. He quickly exhausted his energy and had to rest on the surface. Just then, a sharp pain shot through his abdomen. Realizing his numb lower body was gradually sinking, he refused to give up. Mustering all his strength, he managed to surface again, but the prolonged oxygen deprivation caused him to black out, and he slowly sank toward the ocean floor. As his feet touched the seafloor, he jolted awake. Thinking of his wife, he refused to die like this. His powerful survival instinct unleashed hidden strength. He swung his single-functioning arm, propelling himself upward and finally returning to the surface. Reaching the small island was now impossible. He could only return to where he started.